local election headquarters, this is a special edition of Newsfeed Now, Campaign Trail Today.
It's the second day after election night. Several key states still have thousands of ballots yet to be counted. You're looking at live pictures from a key state that hasn't been declared just yet. Good morning, everyone. Glad you can join us here on Newsfeed Now. I'm Suzanne Bruner. First off, former Vice President Joe Biden was pushing closer to the 270 Electoral College votes needed to carry the White House, securing victories in the blue wall battlegrounds of Wisconsin and Michigan and narrowing President Trump's path. Now, just for transparency, the map that you're taking a look at is reflecting states called by the Associated Press. Again, the numbers there, 264 to 214. Our panelists will join us in just a few minutes. But first, let's go ahead and talk about this morning's headlines. We're going to start off in Nevada, where the state's Democratic Attorney General Aaron Ford said last night they're ready to rebuff any legal challenges the Trump campaign brings against the state's election results. The state is set to release more results later this afternoon. And breaking in the last few minutes, Republicans plan to file a lawsuit alleging voter fraud in Nevada. The Trump campaign holding a news conference about that right now. We'll keep our eye on that and bring you any updates that comes with that. While there are still paths to a second term for President Trump, some may lead through a courtroom. His campaign launched some battleground legal challenges demanding a recount in Wisconsin. That's where Biden is the apparent winner if current results hold there. The Trump campaign is trying to halt vote counting in Georgia, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, making baseless accusations of fraud. Now, both the Trump and Biden campaigns are now in a new phase of fundraising. They're asking supporters for any donations to help pay for the legal challenges that they're going to see ahead. But dozens of angry protesters of President Trump converged on vote counting centers in Detroit and Phoenix as the returns went against him Wednesday in those two key states. All this happening while thousands of anti-Trump protesters took to the streets of some major cities demanding a complete tally of the ballots. A federal judge harshly criticized the U.S. Postal Service, saying the agency had failed to comply with his order to sweep postal facilities for leftover mail-in ballots in battleground states where election officials continue to count votes. The Postal Service said in court filings earlier this week, nearly 300,000 ballots had been scanned into the U.S. mail system since October 24th, but had not been scanned again to show they had been delivered. So, taking a look at the numbers here, that includes Pennsylvania. I believe that was 11,000 there, nearly 16,000 in Florida, and more than 6,000 in Michigan. The data raised alarm among voting rights groups that some mail-in ballots could be delivered too late to be counted. Now let's bring in our panelists to talk more about the stories we just told you about. We have Jesse Tenor joining us from our D.C. bureau. We also have Archit Sasadri joining us from Atlanta, Georgia. And we also have Jordan Tracy from Pennsylvania and Tom Hillen from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Great to see you guys. Thanks for joining us to talk more about these stories. Let's go ahead and start off in Michigan. Let's go ahead and talk about it looks like this is going to Biden right now, Tom. What's the response there from both campaigns?
Well, so far, the Associated Press and NBC News, which we're affiliated with, have called this race in Joe Biden's favor. They've also called the hotly contested Senate race here for the Democrat Gary Peters. So obviously, the Democratic Party of Michigan feeling very good about those two wins here in the state of Michigan. The Republicans, though, not feeling so great. John James was a second time he was running against a Democratic senator here within the last 4 years. And obviously, turnout played a huge role here in Michigan, specifically in the city of Detroit. We know that 4 years ago, the city of Detroit just did not have the robust numbers that they had this year, and that is really making the big difference here in Michigan. A second area making the big difference is Kent County, which is where Grand Rapids is located. It has largely and for a very long time been a Republican stronghold, but it is also the second fastest growing county in the state of Michigan. And for only the second time in recent memory, Kent County went blue for Barack Obama the first time, and now is the second time that is going blue in a presidential election. So Republicans losing some ground here in the state.
All right, let's take a look in Georgia now. We have 99% of ballots reporting in the state. That's according to the Associated Press. Press. That's the latest numbers right now. Of course, nothing has been called just yet, but Archith, what's the latest count there? And talk about more about what the Secretary of the State spoke about just a bit ago.
Yeah, we just got out of that press conference not too long ago. In fact, we're outside of the Capitol. I'm just going to kind of show you where we are here. Gabrielle Sterling, he's the voting implementation manager. He talked to us and said there's still about 61,000 ballots that are pending here in Georgia. So originally we heard 25,000 and we may get results by noon. That is not the case. These numbers are more than likely going to be counted till the end of day, hopefully by the end of the day. So 61,000 ballots to be processed in several metro Atlanta counties, about 17,000 in Savannah, Chatham County as well. And that is exactly where President Trump and the Trump campaign has filed a lawsuit. We did ask Gabrielle Sterling, the voting implementations manager, what happened, if they've heard anything about polling issues or any kind of ballots that were received late. And they have not heard those. And they don't comment on those pending investigations. But what we do know is many counties like Atlanta, Fulton, they counted throughout the night to get those ballots counted and processed. And now that margin between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, at least for the presidential race, continues to narrow down, about 20,000 difference. So all of these votes will make a huge, huge difference. There's also about 27,000 military and overseas ballots that have to be postmarked by Tuesday, but can be accepted as late as Friday. So we're talking about 61,000 plus another 27,000, a little less than 85,000 or so that could come into Georgia, and those could make or break for those 16 electoral votes up for grabs.
Archith, real quick, let's talk about that lawsuit again. Correct me if I'm wrong. You said that nothing was said exactly what that lawsuit entailed?
Yeah, I asked the voting implementations manager, I said, listen, there's a lawsuit that's happening. We're in the middle of counting. Savannah, Chatham County, the way they process and count is a little bit different than some of the other counties and polling precincts here. And the voting manager said they haven't heard any issues of ballots being dropped off late. As we do know, President Trump has sued 3 different states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Georgia. They said they've not heard any reports of ballots being dropped off after that 7 p.m. deadline. But I do want to point out that some counties like Spalding here in Atlanta, some counties did extend voting because they had software glitches and technical issues. But he said no issues just of yet. Of course, they will investigate that and figure that out. And he said if the margin is between 0.5%, either of the candidates can demand a recount. We don't know just yet because they still have to count before we can get to a recount. So the waiting game is on. 16 electoral votes. We have one Senate race that's heading to a runoff. We don't know yet if John Ossoff and David Perdue, that race will also go into a runoff. So again, 16 electoral votes, 2 Senate races, one going to a runoff. We don't know about the other one yet. But again, 61,000 votes here. Georgia is still very close. Will Biden Trump? We don't know just yet.
Okay, Archith, thanks so much. Let's go to Pennsylvania now. Gosh, millions of, more than 1 million votes are being counted there as of yesterday. But let's check in with Jordan right now. Jordan, bring us up to date. What's happening in Pennsylvania? President Trump was leading the polls there at this time. What's the latest count there right now?
Well, that divide is definitely narrowing as more mail-in ballots are being counted. I will say this morning it has been updated. It says now there's about 580,000 ballots still to be counted here in Pennsylvania, which is a lot considering the margin has dropped to right around 30,000 ballots between the 2 candidates. So it's looking here as we progress and more ballots get counted that the lead is continuing to narrow. These are Democratic votes for the most part in a high margin. These mail-in ballots have been from registered Democrats. So it's definitely concerning for the Trump campaign. Now, lawsuits have been filed as well here in Pennsylvania. Last night, a decision was made based on, if you saw, Rudy Giuliani had a press conference in Philadelphia saying that their poll watchers weren't given enough opportunity to watch what was going on in Philadelphia County. And a judge last night ordered that the election code was being followed. That has since been reversed this morning by another judge saying that they should allow these poll watchers as close as 6 feet as COVID precautions demand. So it's definitely
I don't know if you got it, the lawsuit.
Definitely a developing situation here in Pennsylvania. Montgomery County, the 3rd largest county in Pennsylvania, which is a Democratic stronghold, reported this morning that they are done.
I know, let's go.
So we're looking at the margin.
What do y'all like?
Counties, whether they're Republican strongholds or Democratic strongholds, to see if this election can be won in the margins, which was the goal by both campaigns going into this election.
Real quick, can you touch on, we've seen protests happening across the country. We'll get to that here in just a little bit, but what has it been like out there in terms of demonstrators and their reaction to the continued counting of these ballots?
Well, I think you see in Philadelphia, particularly where a lot of this is happening on the eastern side of Pennsylvania, people want these votes counted, and I think you're seeing those demonstrations for that, and also definitely the press conferences or things like that from the Trump campaign has called into question some of the practices here, and that's where the unrest is happening. Now, I'm here in central Pennsylvania, where it is red across the board, where the president was trying to really lock down his supporters and that margin that he had in 2016. You're not seeing any demonstrations here in central Pennsylvania and not quite in western Pennsylvania either.
All right. Thanks so much for bringing us up to speed there in Pennsylvania. I want to talk to Jesse right now, who's joining us from our D.C. bureau. Those protests happening outside of the White House as well. How are people reacting there, Jesse? And have you spoken to any lawmakers? How have they reacted to those protests?
Yeah, there haven't been as many demonstrations as I think the city was prepared for. That fence, the 10-foot fence, has been up around the White House for quite some time. They've just added more density to it, I guess you could say, adding more layers around there just so people couldn't scale the wall and scale the fence and hop over. And then businesses and offices in the area too have been boarded up, but definitely not as much demonstrations as the city was prepared for. As far as lawmakers go, we're hearing from Democrats and Republicans, but the response from Republicans so far has been pretty sparse just because we're still waiting on the results of the presidential election itself. As far as Congress goes, there's definitely some disappointment among Democrats for not holding and expanding they held their majority in the House, but they were hoping to expand it more to kind of build upon that blue wave that we saw in 2018. And there was some momentum too that looked like where they could potentially flip the Senate. There's still some races that some of you have mentioned that have yet to officially be called, but it's looking like that potentially won't happen. And so the lawmaker response in general has been pretty sparse since a lot of these results are still coming in.
That's right. Jesse, I also want to talk to you a little bit about, I know you've been following the Trump campaign very closely this past week. What's the very latest coming out of that campaign?
So we can now add a fourth lawsuit to the mix of all of this that we were just talking about in Nevada. So the Trump campaign is there right now announcing voter fraud allegations. But what remains to be seen is exactly when these cases could potentially hit the U.S. Supreme Court. President Trump was already teasing that, saying that they're headed that way. But that still remains to be seen. It's always really hard to put timelines on this, as we've seen too with counting the election results. You can't throw out a time because it'll probably be wrong. So what we can kind of bet on potentially, just from what the justices have indicated themselves, is on Pennsylvania, since a case had already made its way there. There's already been 2 decisions on it. Right now, where it essentially stands is that that state can continue collecting, counting ballots up to 3 days after the election. President Trump has made it very clear that he's wanted to challenge that. The justices kind of left it open-ended that they could come back to it. And so that would maybe be the first one that we could potentially see, but these others are brewing as well. And then also that call for a recount already in Wisconsin.
So just to reiterate, the lawsuit in Pennsylvania that you were talking about, that already is going through the Supreme Court. What about the other 3? Could that reach the Supreme Court as well?
They definitely have the potential, but of course, starting off, they have to, make it through the lower courts and, kind of be put to the test on a factual basis. And right now, just from what we've been able to figure out and what we've been able to hear is that right now these are just allegations, still working on evidence before they can be, kind of make their way through the courts. They can't just, President Trump can't essentially just tweet and say, this is what we need to have happen. They need to first make their way through the lower courts.
Right. Okay. So that's the process right there. If it does make it there, Jesse, how much can they actually do in affecting the election?
A lot of people are looking back to 2000, where it clearly had an impact there. That's why President Trump, too, really put that tight timeline on the Senate to confirm Justice Amy Coney Barrett, because he was hoping, since she is a more conservative justice, that she would potentially rule on a case of a contested election and potentially rule in his favor. During her confirmation hearing, she, of course, made it very clear that she would not rule based on politics or anything of that nature. She did not even touch on, when asked by lawmakers, if she would recuse herself from such a case. So there's still so much up in the air that we just don't know.
All right. So Jesse, Jordan, Tom, this next question is for the three of you. So whoever wants to come at this first, please do so. But this was something that we saw coming, the protest. This is something that business even saw coming. We saw pictures of different cities kind of boarding up, just kind of preparing what could potentially happen. We're seeing it outside some election quarters as well, where people are voting. You're looking at video right now. What are they trying to accomplish with their protest? What are they exactly protesting here? Because we're seeing it on both sides of the aisle.
So in Detroit last night is in Michigan, where we saw a little bit of this played out, and it was people wanting to get into the actual area where they're counting the ballots so that they could be election watchers and watch this process happen. And they were not allowed in because of COVID-19 restrictions here. However, there were poll watchers and ballot counter watchers for both Democrats and Republicans there. We saw it with our crews in the field. So what we saw in Detroit last night was a lot of chanting of stop the vote, stop the vote, stop the steal. There were counter protests, so Democrats out there as well saying, keep counting. So one side wants the votes to stop being counted. The other side wants to continue the count of the mail-in ballots here.
Okay.
Yeah, I think in Pennsylvania, it's really just a wait and see. I think the sentiments are the same as you were saying in Detroit, but I think it's still a wait and see process. It's still ongoing. I think we want to see the votes get counted, but the president's campaign also wants to see if it's counted correctly and if possibly they could hold it.
All right. Guys, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for weighing in. Of course, we're going to keep our eye on the process. It might take a while to get those ballots counted, but you can always count on us to bring you the latest local, national results. You're going to find that on this website. Join us tomorrow, 10:30 Central Time. Have a great day.